Hello and welcome to this lecture on politics and the political. And now this is a flipped classroom lecture, so you have it here recorded. And then before class, you are expected to upload answers, just short answers to a couple of questions, at least 90 minutes before class, so I can group you together in groups, discussion groups, when we meet in the classroom. But here is the lecture. Okay, let's make sure I have the camera on as well. It won't go into saving mode. Perhaps I should plug this in. Uh, okay, so in this lecture we're going to attend to politics in the lecture or in the course Cyberculture and Politics. What do we mean with politics and the political? And I will first and foremost present you with two approaches to the political, arguably two of the most influential and mostly referred to in the field, that of Habermas, whose book you have read for this lecture, as well as Chantal Moufle, and her book you also have read for the lecture, her attempt to be popular scientific in her On the Political book. And then, of course, you will have a little bit of my own thoughts as well. Okay, so let's start. Let's start with Habermas here. Now, perhaps you know a little bit about Habermas before, but his idea of the political is grounded in his idea of the public sphere that you might have heard some about before. Now, the book that you have read, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, that was translated into English not until 1989, but that was written in German much earlier. That was part of his habilitation or habilitation, as it's called in German, what you have to do to become an associate professor. There he developed his idea of this public sphere, and this is, as he view it, the space between the state and the private sphere, and this is the space or the sphere where public opinions are formed. So it's a kind of discursive space as a space where people debate and discuss it with each other, but it's not in the home and is not on the state. It's in the public sphere, and this idea of the public sphere has been immensely important in democratic thinking in general, and in media and democratic theory in particular, because obviously the idea of media as a public sphere has been very strong, that this is the sphere where public opinions are formed. But it's all has also then been very important for our conception of the political as dealing with things of the states, but not within the state in itself, that the political opinions and that is formed in the public sphere. Important to be reminded here, talking about Habermas, is that his concept and his book is normative, in the sense that he's not describing primarily things as they are. He's providing an ideal to strive for. So, and for me, this is one of the major problems when people and researchers apply Habermas. When I go to conferences and there's tons of papers on Habermas, but people don't realize that he has not provided an analytical model of things as they are. What he has provided is a normative ideal to strive for. As such, you can use it to measure things against. Do they live up to this ideal of the public sphere or not? But yeah, important to keep in mind, it's a normative ideal. So this public space or public sphere here is a space for citizenship and participation. We will get to these concepts later in the lecture, but this is where the civic subject, if you so wish, is formed. This is where the citizen participate. at least from an activist point of view, as outside of the parliamentary setting, still trying to influence public decision makers. As I told you, this is normative, this is an ideal, and according to Habermas, this public sphere should be characterized by what he calls an ideal speech situation. So what is this then? Well, you should allow for several different opinions, a diversity of opinions. You should be devoid of restriction imposed by capital, should be open for everyone, and everyone should be equal in participation. Everyone should be listened to equally. As you realize here, this is not always the case. It is normative in that sense, but this is what we should strive for, this ideal speech situation, as Habermas calls it. Important for his theorizing here is also his idea of communicative rationality, in the sense that how to explain this? Well, he's an Enlightenment scholar, coming out of the Enlightenment era, working in the footsteps of Adorno and Horkheimer. Adorno, whose chair he took over in Frankfurt after he died. So, or stepped down, I'm not quite sure. Anyway, he took over his chair. So what his ideal here is that we should strive for truth, for enlightenment, to become enlightened. Yeah? But he thinks that we cannot really know what is the truth, or what is the enlightened state of beings, because we are so trapped in our life world, in the world that is surrounded by us and our way of thinking, that we cannot really grasp this world, the truth out there, so to speak. So the only rational thing to do in order to strive for enlightenment, in order to reach enlightenment, is to talk to each other. We have to communicate with each other. So this is what he means is then a communicative rationality, because we are so trapped in our life worlds, we have to communicate with each other in order to reach enlightenment. Now this, of course, we can talk about this in class if you want more, but this builds on kind of an ontological, an idea of ontology as there is a truth. Compared to postmodernism, some of you perhaps have been acquainted with that where everything is relative. There is one truth for me, one truth for you. Well, according to Habermas, there is one truth, and we can reach that truth if we talk to each other. And we should talk to each other, and we should strive to agree upon something that is best for all. And this is also very different, because there are critics, Moufle among them, who claims that Habermas is very liberal, in kind of bunches him together with liberal thinkers. Now, he has his background in critical theory, being the student of Adorno, and he also criticized capitalism, for example. So it's important to acknowledge here that this idea of the communicative rationality, and that we are driven by a wish, or we should at least be driven by a wish to talk to each other, is very different from this kind of liberal market capitalist idea that we are driven by our own self-interest, to maximize our own self-interest. This is what drives us. So important to keep in mind. Communicative rationality is very different from then instrumental rationality here, or a liberal idea of politics. A liberal idea of politics is that we participate because we want to satisfy our needs, our personal private needs. Now, this is not Habermas. We participate because we want to talk to each other, we want to understand, and we want to agree. Now, as you can hear, this is very normative, this is an ideal. This might not be the case all the time. So we might be driven by our own self-interest, but we should not be, according to Habermas. Okay, so we've been into these differences here between the life world and the system, a difference that is very important in Habermas theorizing, where yeah, the life world is this world that is around us in as we're living, and the system is the place of the media, for example, and other things. So it's important to keep in mind here. Yes, I've talked about enlightenment and that. So what Habermas does in the book is he's kind of make this historical overview how the public sphere arose out of the in the coffee houses in the 18th and 19th century. Now, this is a time when we have the rise of city-states, of mercantilism, and the bourgeoisie, so to speak, the burghers. Not the burghers, the Bürger in German, and burger sounds weird in English. Anyway, they became powerful in the sense that they became a force to count on in society. It was not only the noblemen any longer, it was also these merchants who had these trades across the Atlantic, etc. So they were getting to become a power of its own, and they were seeing themselves as subjects that had something to say and had interest at stake in how tolls were taken up, etc., etc. So they started to become politically aware in that sense, and they started to speak to each other and debate to each other about issues of common concern in the coffee houses. So, and Habermas kind of idealizes these coffee houses. Now, feminists have been criticizing him widely because this, of course, it was a very male-dominated environment, and perhaps women having their sewing clubs and drinking coffee together has, this kind of public sphere has always been present among the female. However, this becomes a little bit in the shadow in Habermas thinking. So it's been very criticized there. Now, what Habermas argues here is that the public sphere was colonized by commercial media in the 20th century. He talks about the refeudalization, that's a difficult word, refeudalization of the public sphere. So there is the golden era in the 19th century of the public sphere, and then it declines because of the commercialization of media. Yes. So in his historical overview, he starts with starting Greece, talking about oikos, the home, versus this city-state, the polis. These were two very different spheres. And then something happens. We had a feudal society with someone deciding, a landlord, well, not a landlord, but the count, or the one who owned the estates that farmers had to pay for to use the land to grow their things, etc. This is called the feudal society. And according to Habermas, there's a difference here, that the public sphere, in a sense, there's things that is between the state and the home in these feudal societies from the 12th to this 18th centuries here, was very ceremonial and used to show off. I mean, the kings would parade down the street with in all their glory, etc. So it was a very showing off kind of sphere. Now, when he talks about the refeudalization of the public sphere in the 20th century with commercial media, he draws parallels to this time here when media and this kind of public is just used to show off. And it kind of blends the private and the public together in ways that he does not like. So reasoning citizens, if you think about the coffee houses, the mercantiles in the 19th century becomes replaced by consumers. And here you can also clearly see how he has his roots in critical theory, in Adorno and Horkheimer and these people. Now, the question here is, of course, whether this public sphere returns with the internet. Now, and I mean, this is a $1 million question in that sense. I mean, there are tons, hundreds, I would even dare to say thousands of papers on the internet as a public sphere. Is the internet a public sphere? Now, this is something for you to think about. I mean, perhaps this is something you want to discuss in class when we meet. Do you think that the internet is a public sphere in the Habermasian sense of the word? Can we talk about ideal speech situations there, etc.? Now, this has been occupying scholars for a long time. And also worth to be mentioned here is also the connection to deliberative democracy, perhaps a term that you recognize. Deliberative democracy arose out of this larger participatory democratic regime. I mean, you had the participatory budgeting in Porto Alegre in Brazil, the idea that people could deliberate, should sit down and talk to each other, and then reach some kind of agreement, as in a public sphere. This has been widely influential. I wrote my doctoral dissertation about this. Civic committees in Sweden, there has been many attempts to invite citizens to talk in order to, perhaps not like in Brazil where they can decide a part of the budget in the participatory budgeting. It's also been widely popular, but other arenas, citizen panels, etc., etc. And this is a huge trend. It's starting to fade away a little bit now. But this is very much inspired by Habermas thinking. So it's about the idea that we should reason towards the public best and this kind of consensus, that we should agree upon things together. What is the best course of action? This is what this should lead to. And once again, this is in stark opposition to a liberal view who sees that we when I sit down at the table to talk in the public sphere, if you so wish, the idea is not that I should listen to each other's argument. We should try to agree upon something. No, I have I've already made up my mind. I want, the trees outside here in my garden to be cut down, so I have a better view of the seaside, and this is what I want, and this is what I'm going to try to enforce in this negotiation. So there is very much a difference here between the deliberative and the liberal idea of politics. Now, the liberal idea, you have your preconceived ideas that you want to enforce. That's why you participate in politics or in the public sphere. In the deliberative view of politics, you form your opinions in discussion with others. You don't have it pre-formed. So there is the difference. You can also, I talked about instrumental and communicative rationality. Now, the rationality, to communicate with others, to strive for enlightenment, to reach consensus, it's very much different than to use participation as an instrument to get what you already have decided you want. I want more trees to be cut down by the municipality so I get a sea view. I can use this civic committee or this community meeting, these elections, as an instrument to get what I want, so-called instrumental rationality. And yeah, I've been talking about expressive rationality in my paper also, that perhaps we also are motivated to participate to kind of negotiate some kind of identity. Now, this is a different story. We can talk about it if you want. So I've just opposed this with my idea of expressive rationality. Anyway, in this deliberative Habermasian understanding of politics, it is... politics is about the process to reach agreement, to discuss rationally, and to reach consensus in other ways. Now, so in a sense, Habermas is a very procedural idea of politics, but what does really politics deal with. Just to mention here before we go into Moufle, now in general agreement seems to be politics deals with the organization of our joint life, our joint world together. Acts with the intention to organize and govern a community or a network, if you so wish. I mean, we are in digital media and society class here. This goes back to John Dewey, The Public and Its Problems, that he wrote in 1927. You can find ideas about politics in this way, as well as in Van Dyck, his writings in the at the turn of the millennium. Swedish scholar Lars Nord has also talked about politics as dealing with how society should be structured. So this is what we talk about when we talk about politics. It's about talking about how our joint life and society should be organized, and this is never ending in that sense. It's always constructing. I mean, Barbara Cruikshank talks about politics as a discursive construction, continuously being defined by citizen practices. So this is always happening and always taking place. It's not that we decide how to live our life together once and for all. It all constantly has to be discussed. And also Hannah Arendt, in her theorizing in the human condition, she writes about the bios politikos as a sphere of action. It's something that we do through speech and words for the reorganization of the polis here, the states. So the organization of society, and this can you also find in Foucault. It's concerned with men's coexistence, so how to organize our life together. Now, very important then in politics, organizing our life together, our coexistence together, is equality. This is kind of something that drives us into this, that there is some idea that this distribution of the society's common good, or that society should be equal in one way or another. And philosopher Rancière has been very early in pointing at equality as one of the main functions for the political. And you can also see this in the etymology of the word polis. I mean, in Greece, they made a difference between oikos, the home, and polis, the state. And in oikos, in Greece, in ancient Greece, they had slaves. So the oikos, the home, did not know equals, but in the polis, only equal men were allowed to participate. So you have it already in the beginning, in the etymology of the world, and how polis was differentiated from oikos in ancient Greece. So, but here is where we can start to see a little bit of Moufle's perspective here on, and focus on conflict, because when we are starting to talk to each other about how to distribute the common goods and how to organize our life together in equal way, in equal manner, we might have different opinions, different groups, different individuals might have different opinions how this should be done, and this may then lead to conflict. I mean, yeah, talking about religion is, I guess, perhaps the most obvious example here. I mean, can we live life together where we mock the Prophet Muhammad? Is it acceptable or not? So then we can get into conflict with each other. So, and this also we find in Dewey, that the political, yes, it deals with the organization of society, but it's about these conflicts that arises and how to deal with these conflicts, and how we should then, of course, conceive of people in these conflicts. Should we conceive of people as just trying to get their way, maximize their interests, or as the liberals? Or should we conceive of people as actually wanting to reach agreements and consensus? Depends on what perspective of politics you have, a deliberative, Habermasian, or a liberal. Uh, so equality here, I mean, worth to mention here is also T.S. Marshall's seminal work on citizenship and social class. His book that came out in 1950 that has been very important in the field for the theorizing in the field, where he points at the differences in equality of opportunities and real equality. So he says that it's not enough to just say that everyone should be equal to participate. Everyone should have the equal right to vote. One person, one vote. We also have to strive for equality in reality, that there is some kind of equality between people in terms of incomes and this, etc. And he also have a very interesting reasoning in his book about the individual here and individualism, how this at the same time is a foundation for our conception of citizenship. Citizenship and citizenship rights are bestowed to individuals. So it's very important in our thinking of citizenship. At the same time, the same idea of individuality, that we are different from each other, he argues forms the basis of capitalism and the basis of inequality. Because if we are to view each other as individuals and having the right to be different from each other, then we can also justify inequalities between people, according to him. Very interesting, very happy to discuss this with you if you want in the class. But according to Marshall here and many others, equality is very important because it becomes the bond, the kind of glue that ties citizens together. That the idea that we are equal and that we have the equal opportunities and that there is some kind of equality between us, and this is what makes us feel as a society and connected to each other. Now it can be argued with these increasing income differences, and Sweden generally been a country where the income difference is rather small. Now it's increasing the most in the OECD countries. What does this do to society, the cohesion of society? Well, according to Marshall, is very bad. Another of these civic bonds or civic glues is justice, that with the belief that there is an equality before law, that everyone is equal before the law, that is this kind of glue that ties us together. And so what happens when this is not met? We have the anti-European Union riots in Göteborg, for example, where people there were felt that they who participated in this riot were condemned to much harsher sentences than others. Were they then equal for the law? What does it do to the society's cohesion? Anyway, where all this is leading to is that this reasoning opens up the political as a space of power and conflicts, and this is where Chantal Moufle comes in. Now, for Moufle and her life partner Laclos, who died last year, Ernesto Laclos, their starting point is in processes of identification. Now, this is one of the most central parts of being a human, is in dividing ourselves into groups of us and them. And so there is always this us, Christians, Swedes, them, Muslims, Russians or whatever, we Ukrainians, they, Russia. I mean, these things that we middle class, middle age, them, the kids, etc. And this always entails this kind of frontiers that separate us, Laclos and Moufle writes about. So out of this reasoning, this kind of constant dividing between us and them is conflict. Conflict is always inherent in outlining the other, and this is always also very important for the political, according to Moufle. political struggles always have to do with conflicts over interest and resources in organizational society. We know that, but following Moufle, we should not try to brush this under the carpet in trying to reach consensus, and say like, no, there is no conflict. We sit here around the table and everyone loves each other, and we're now going to reach consensus, and then we're going to hold hands and sing songs and eat chocolate. No. What we need to do in the public sphere is to bring conflicts to the fore, to show for the people like, okay, there are conflicts in society, there are different groups. Choose among these groups and these conflicts and be aware about these conflicts. This is what the political is about, to bring conflicts to the fore. So she's very critical of Habermas here and criticizing him, even though I think that perhaps it's misled sometimes. They are not that different from each other as they think, but that's another story. So the radical, then in radical, her approach is often called radical democratic or radical pluralist, in the sense that it should bring all these conflicts and different groups to the fore, these plural societies, radical pluralism. So the radical here refers to expressions of difference and a focus on dissent and conflict as very important elements in a democracy that should not be hidden. It should be brought to the fore. And also by identifying others and pointing out others is also related to constructing a coherent us. And here Laclau, her life companion, has written very interestingly about vagueness as being a very important part of this construction of the us. I mean, if we can construct the us as vaguely as possible, so as many people as possible can feel encompassed in this, then we can be a bigger group and perhaps reach, be more powerful in that sense. One example is, for example, Reclaim the Streets. I don't know if you remember this, but when I was young, there was this movement in cities that was called Reclaim the Streets, and it was kind of anti-capitalist. That you were seeing increasingly advertisements in the street, but you could not have a party. You could not. The idea that the other things should be seen in the city than just commercials. So it turned out to become a very anti-capitalist, radical left kind of movement. We were dancing in the street. We were occupying a part of the street, not letting cars pass, and we were dancing techno music and that kind of stuff. But in the beginning, this also attracted a lot of Christian Democrats, for example, Christian fundamentalists who had ideas that the city should be more family friendly, talking about family conservative ideals. So the us here, the people, Reclaim the City for the people, was so empty. I mean, in semiotics they talk about empty signifiers. It was so empty, this signifier, the people, that people could put everything into this signifier, but then of course it was later developed and it became less empty or less vague, this signifier. We can talk about the people as a signifier now. The people is perhaps now claimed by xenophobic right-wing parties in Sweden, the Sweden Democrats. They have claimed that they talk about the people, and perhaps the left have lost this fight over this signifier, the people. Anyway, vagueness very important here. So digital media here could then be offering a radical public sphere here in the sense that many different voices can come to the fore. They can express their identity, outline us and others, gain publicity, etc., etc. A public sphere. Now, important to keep in mind here is that radical democracy is also partly a normative perspective. It also have this kind of yardstick quality to it, because reading Moufle, as you have done, she also talks about agonism here. Yes, we should bring differences to the fore, but we should always respect one another. We should not kill each other. This is not what she's advocating. We should respect the others as an adversary, not as an enemy. And then she develops the concept of antagonism versus agonism. If agonism is what we should strive for, we're respecting each other, saying like, hey, you're different, this is good, bring it on, so people can see that there are differences and then they can choose, rather than say like, you're different, I'm gonna kill you, kind of, okay, making a very crude example here. So in that sense it also becomes normative whether the public sphere does live up to this agonistic character in that sense, or is it just antagonistic? This is also a way to measure the quality of a public, if you take a radical democratic stance, that is. So a recap here. So if we take the question then, may digital platforms, Facebook, Twitter, what we now want to study, can we consider them as political platforms? Well, it depends on the framework you depart from. I mean, are these platforms or these threads that you're analyzing, are they like public spheres characterized by communicative rationality where everyone listens to each other, trying to reach agreement, reach some kind of consensus? Well, yeah, then you would use a Habermasian analytical model to try to analyze this digital platform. But you could also use a radical democratic or radical pluralist analytical framework. Then you would try to look at these radical arenas. Are they characterized by agonistic here participation? Do they bring processes of identifications to the fore, and in which differences are highlighted? So these are two very, very different ways of conceiving of the political. Okay, so let's now just talk a little bit about a very important concept here, namely the citizen. Or the political subject, so to speak, because we have been touching upon the citizen here, both with Marshall's work, but also in Moufle and Habermas, about talking about the citizen. Now, citizenship, it's often understood as rights and duties. You have rights and duties as a citizen, and citizenship is also sometimes understood as membership in a political, sometimes imagined, but in a political community or a network, if you so wish. So this membership entails then equality is important in the political, equal participation with fellow members, citizens, in the making of the collective decisions that regulate social life of the community. Now, citizenship here also describes identities connected to people's aspirations of democracy and equality, for that matter. So we can then talk about both citizenship as a legal status received from a political community. You become citizen of Sweden, you get this kind of thumbprint evidence that you're a citizen, but it's also about what you do. It's about agencies, the practices that you're engaged in related to this political community. Now, the question becomes then, is it outdated to speak about citizenship as membership, given that, we live in a globalized world with network media, internet, etc.? Can we then talk about, citizenship? And many have talked about universal human rights, and citizenship is necessarily excluding. I'm talking about what's happening in Europe now with immigrants from Syria refugees from Syria not being able to come to Europe in legal ways, etc., etc. Maybe we should say that citizenship is universal, that everyone should be granted citizenship rights because we're human beings, and that citizenship rights then should be the same as human rights. Is this the way to go? Should citizenship rights be universal? Um, should we reject this association to political community and say that citizenship rights applies to all human beings? And to be fair here, many people have argued. I mean, feminist, queer activists have used the citizenship discourse to forward their rights and their struggles. So it has been very useful. But the question then is does something get lost if we associate citizenship with humanity rather than constitution? Well, I would argue so. I think it's important here to to have the political community part of the equation here, that you always act in relation to this power, this community, political community, or this authority. I mean, it's important if you're gonna have rights. It's important that it's someone who can grant you rights, and someone who is imposing duties on you and regulations, and that this is accepted. So I think that equating citizenship right with human rights is just mixing two concepts that works very well separately. To go back to Aristotle's word, to be a citizen is about ruling and being ruled in turn. But then they also have something to rule by or rule about. So the importance here, I would say, of the power and authority. So for me, when I've been talking about citizenship, I've argued that we should conceive of it as participation in relation to an authority here in a political community. And participation becoming very important here, political participation in that manner, because this constructs the political community as well as the citizen at the same time. And talking about political community as an authority, we can turn to Foucault and his idea of authority as a power-knowledge dimension. We could start building a very interesting theory here. I think I skip Foucault for now and continue to talk about participation, which is perhaps more important here, political participation. So by engaging, participating, or deliberating politically, we act in relation to an authority, a power, knowledge dimension that socializes us into certain practices. Important to keep in mind here when talking about participation, there are in theories differences made between participation, engagement, and deliberation. For example, Peter Dahlgren, my old supervisor, he talks about participation as being something collective, something that is done perhaps in the public sphere, together with others, whereas engagement is the subjective requirement for participation. For example, I might feel that I should now go and demonstrate against the killings of the French satire comic from the magazine Charles Hebdo who were murdered. And I might, since I'm perhaps working at the newspaper myself, I feel that this is very important for me. I have this subjective engagement that is important before I go to the manifestation, demonstration, to manifest my ideas. So important here, engagement is not always the same as participation. And then deliberation. Is deliberation participation? Or yes, we could argue that communication or deliberation, if so wish, is participation. From the heydays of discourse theory, we know that speech is action, speech acts, etc. So when talking about participation here, it also includes communicating together, that this could be considered participation. So where are we? Political participation socializes us also. I mean, it also have these kind of socializing dimensions. There are certain norms and values of participation. We should be aware of that. Power dimensions, power dynamics There are expectations of us, how to behave, which make us behave in certain ways. The more people there are, the more likely that we are to behave. Maybe you feel that you can start going naked among your closest friends, but perhaps you don't show up in class next time naked because there is more people, to make a very crude example here. So we have this kind of personal control that is connected to the mass here, to the norms of values that imposes a control on us, a personal control system. One of my favorite sociologists, Norbert Elias, a Jewish German sociologist, talks about this. But what I wonder then, and that I would like you to perhaps think about if you want, are there norms and values or expectations of participation? How to participate, especially for an activist? Are there, ways to do this and ways not to do this that is expected of us? I don't know. Perhaps not. What do you think? Important to notice here, of course, that these norms and values can always be negotiated. We are then, and as they are negotiated, or as we act, as we participate, we are also changing them, and we make meaning with this participation. And meaning making, as we know from anthropology, is what culture is. So then it ties back to the course, CyberCulture and Politics. Culture is about meaning making. Yes, citizenship here as agency. So participation then, to participate then is a way to enact yourself as a citizen. To be a citizen is to participate, to act in that sense. And this you do with others. The importance of others here, as Dewey outlines, that what we hope, believe, and aim for is always an association, an interaction with others. Well, not always, perhaps, but often. So, yes, citizenship as agency, I've been saying that. The importance of acting together. And here we see that participation then both becomes, so political participation, both becomes a right, an equal right of citizen, as well as a duty, because democracy depends on it. The political community becomes constituted through our participation in it. If no one would vote in the election, the whole system would break down. So it's dependent on our participation. Okay, I'll end it there. A lot of concepts, a lot of ideas, hopefully a lot of interesting thoughts. So for the class, I want you to think about two things. First of all, and first and foremost, having listened to this lecture, read the books, was there anything you didn't understand? Now, this is important that you are true to yourself and say, because it's your it's your right to you have a right for education here. So if you didn't understand anything, please put it down. We can discuss it in class, and you can discuss it with others, perhaps. So this is very important, and there are no stupid questions. You know that. And then, is there anything you would like to discuss further? I mean, I pointed out certain discussion points in the lecture. Perhaps there is other discussion points or other things that made you start thinking. Put this also down, and then you have to upload this on Studentportalen. And 19 minutes before class, so I have the possibility to group you together in the groups, in interesting groups. So yes. Not more than 2 sentences is needed here. It's just to make this interesting when we meet in class. And yes, with that, I say bye-bye and see you in class.